I want to start off, I'm going to go back to last week's session a little bit and talk about worldview, because I think it relates to his reaching out to those who are lost, those who are needy, and those are the kind of things that we need to zone in on. But a lot of it centers around our worldview. Now there's a scripture verse in Matthew 16:12, and it's right after Jesus fed the 5,000. The people came to see him speak, and they were there for 3 days. And so Jesus said to his disciples, give them something to eat. They went, are you crazy? There's nothing around here. So he multiplied the loaves and the fish, and everybody ate, and they collected so many baskets. And the disciples didn't get it. Jesus was asking them about him and what went on and what was happening. And what was going on was that, I think I switched the thing here a little bit. But how can you possibly not understand? I wasn't talking to you about the bread, but watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Then the disciples understood that Jesus was not telling them to watch out for the yeast used in bread. He was warning them against what the Pharisees and Sadducees taught. And so that was all related to Jesus trying to get them to understand that the yeast of the Pharisees, this religious teaching and their mentality of the time, and that's why they were misunderstanding about the bread and him feeding people and what he was doing there in the first place and all the teachings he was getting involved with. It wasn't about that. He was trying to warn them and say, don't let these little things creep into your life. So what I see happening in our society deals a lot with what we're going to talk about now, and that's worldview. And so worldview is, I think, well, okay, good, we got it up there. And it's Immanuel Kant, and I'm going to throw some names out there. You might have heard of these guys, you might not have heard of these guys. But Immanuel Kant was one of these philosophers, and he came up with the worldview and talking about that and saying, how do we make sense out of this world? That's what our worldview is. How do we relate that? And most people don't sit down and think, what do I really believe? They sort of waver, they're floating around, they go back and forth, and they really can't nail down what they believe. But there's three things that are involved with the worldview, and it's our belief system, and then it's our culture, and then it's our ethnicity. So if we think that we're Christians and we've committed our lives to the Lord because, yeah, we got that all figured out, and not necessarily because we're Americans and that's just the way we were, and maybe our ethnic background, like I'm Polish, and so when you're Polish, you just raised as a Catholic. That's just the way it was. And so if you married outside the Catholic Church, you were, man, that was bad mojo. That did not happen. So you got condemned by the rest of the family. So you were kind of channeled into this Christian worldview. But just because we're part of an ethnic group, or just because we're part of a culture, when I would go overseas and I'd be in Taiwan, and I'd be talking to the girls there, and some of them that hung out in this bar that was a restaurant, was one of the few places we could eat. So I'm hanging out in a bar, and this girl was a prostitute, and that's just what happened. But she would look at me puzzled, and she'd say, because I wasn't drinking, I wasn't smoking, and I wasn't sleeping with all the local girls. And they would go to me and they said, well, Mr. So-and-so says he's a Christian, but he does all these things. And you say you're a Christian, and I don't understand. And then I have to explain to her, well, there's different levels of Christianity. And it's not just in Christianity, it's in all religions. There's what you would look at as, and when we look at the Muslims, you hear people arguing, we see the fundamentalists. Those are the radicals on the right, and there's fundamentalists in Christianity that the letter of the law, they won't wear hats, the women, they don't play instruments. There's a denomination that they don't use any type of instrument. I forget which one it is, maybe Seventh-day Adventists or whatever, but Seventh-day Adventists are still locked into the Sabbath. I mean, you do nothing on the Sabbath. Now, that's not a bad thing. Just because you don't have instruments in your services doesn't mean that's a bad thing, but they would be fundamentalists. And so there's fundamentalist Muslims. Then there's the traditionalists. So traditionalists might be referred to as the Catholic Church. And there's a lot of people that are traditional. They're good people. They go to church. They're very religious. They're traditional. And then there's the modern types, which you might refer to as liberal thinkers. There's a liberal sect of Judaism. They're very liberal. They don't follow all the guidelines and all the rules, but they consider themselves Jews. And then there's the modernists in the Islam that a lot of people say, well, there's a lot of great Muslims out there, and there are some nice people, but they're not following the Quran to the T. So this worldview creeps in, and it kind of blends in with us, and we think we're Christians. All right? But the statistics are saying otherwise. Why is worldview important? And it's important because only 4% of Americans really have a biblical worldview. This is a Barna Gallup poll research study. Now, I don't know all the parameters that they listed there, but some of them may be, do you pray on a regular basis? Do you go to church or worship on a regular basis? Do you give money? Okay, you want to go to the bottom line? Show me the money. All right? Do you really think you're a Christian? Well, if you're not giving, and there could be disputes about tithing, whether you have to give 10% or whatever, but if you don't give, you're really not doing the things that Jesus said to do, giving to the poor, reaching out to the poor. So you're saying you got a Christian worldview, but you're really not implementing what the Christian worldview says. Only 9% of the born-again believers have a Christian worldview. And again, it would be incorporating all those things. And you're saying 9%? Well, every once in a while you'll hear in the church here that if everyone in the church just gave their 10%, we would have tons extra in the budget. Tons extra. It wouldn't even be a question. If we could do that, we could go feed the poor. We could take care of all of Pittsburgh. It wouldn't be an issue. It wouldn't be a problem. So then if we got even a little bit more detail and we said, okay, what TV programs are you watching? What movies do you go to? Boy, we might start separating the wheat from the tares really quick. If I see someone saying, well, my favorite program is Jerry Springer. And you're a Christian. Yeah, I like to see them people, going crazy over there and fighting and doing all that kind of stuff. I'm not so sure that your Christian viewpoint is aligning, your worldview is aligning with Christianity, because that's just not Christianity. If you take joy and pleasure in seeing people beat up on each other and him making fun of people's conditions, I'm not sure you're in touch with that Christian worldview. It has everything to do with how we work, how we play, how we deal with our families, everything to do. Our worldview is incorporated in there. And if we understand the worldview of other people, we'll have a good idea of where they're coming from. And you can ask questions to sort of lead you down that path. And worldview has a lot to do with how we feel about, some of these would be considered political issues, but I don't consider abortion a political issue. It's an issue of our faith. It's no better when you see in the Old Testament, you read in the Old Testament that these people worship false gods, and they would take babies up there, and they felt that if they sacrificed babies and threw them in the fire, that they would get the favor of the gods, and that would have crops come up, the rains would come, because they were offering sacrifices to their god, Molech. Well, we're not doing anything different. It's a little bit more sophisticated. It's a little bit more in a nice little clean environment of the abortion clinic, but it's no different. We're offering and sacrificing babies. And the news doesn't even want to see the abhorrent procedures that go on of just chopping up a little fetus of a baby, and arms and legs are coming out, and this suction, this vacuum goes in there and cleans it up. And they won't show it on TV. They'll show blood and guts to our kids. They'll have these games that they'll play, and they'll do all that kind of stuff, but you can't see a baby being chopped up because that might be a little bit too emotional. And it is emotional. It's designed to be emotional. I speak for the Women's Choice Network, and we deal with mainly, our clients are mainly single, unwed, pregnant moms. And people come in, and half of the teenage girls that are 14 and 19 come in, half of them test positive for being pregnant. Now we have sonogram machines. If that girl will agree to get a sonogram, 90%, I think it's like a 90%, might be 95, 90% of them will not get that baby aborted because they see it's moving, it's sucking its thumb, it's doing different things, it's a living being, it's not just a glob of cells. It's living, it takes on character. So these are all worldview things. When we start thinking like some of our politicians who say, well, it's really not a baby until it comes out of the womb. So that little instance when it comes out of the womb, now all of a sudden it's a worthwhile being, but other than that it's not. And our president right now, he's got like I think 100% voting rate against life, right? He's just, yep, abortion. That's the way to go. And when we think of the millions, literally, I think we're up to 1 million something of babies that we've aborted since 70 something when the law came into effect. Our media choices. That's, again, I touched on that earlier. What are our media choices? What are we letting kids watch? All right? If they're seeing junk and garbage on a regular basis, I know when I have a whole chunk of songs on my iPhone here, and I listen to songs when I'm running. And I've got some secular songs on there, but if I like the tune of a secular song, how many, you sing a song from your younger days and you're singing it and you go with the melody, but you don't have a clue what the words are. Okay? Yeah, and they have shows now that, game shows that have people singing their song what they think the lyrics are, and they come out and it's funny and everybody laughs. But do I really want that thing drilled in my head? Music is a gateway to our minds. And to really remember, we were talking about how we're programmed to certain things. Well, music is the gateway that really blends it in to our brain. And those lyrics, our brain's understanding what those lyrics are, even though on a conscious level we're not. But if we got this lyric in it, the lyrics that we're repeating over and over again that is gloom and doom, saying we're dying, life is useless, it's ridiculous, and then we wonder why we're depressed, work with me. Like there's a group out, Nirvana, and it ties into what we're talking about, worldview. They were, I guess, I don't know, maybe the 90s or whatever, and this Kurt Cobain, he overdosed on drugs, real depressed guy, and it was like a suicidal thing. It wasn't just a mistake. I think he just committed suicide. And I like the melodies of their songs, but I go and I look at the lyrics before I'm going to buy that song, and this guy is like all over the place. He's depressed. Sting, oh yeah, Sting. Sting's a great guy. I love a lot of his tunes, man, it's great.